it is perfectly obvious that when you take an enormously homogenous place like the province of Ulster and introduce into it even the smallest amount of heterodox immigration, you are going to come up against problems. Cultural problems, political problems, economic problems.
You would have thought that all the honour was King Charles's to have been in the presence of Sadiq Khan. He said the king was chuffed that I was finally getting my honour, and he apologised. The king apologised to me that I had to wait so long for this honour.
Hello and welcome to Newspeak, the New Cultural Forum's look at the weekly news. I'm Amy Gallagher and I'm joined by our regular commentator, Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, Senior Fellow of the New Cultural Forum and Royal Historian. And we're also joined today by a special guest, David Oldroyd-Bolt of the Danube Institute, is that right?
It is. I'm the Anglosphere Fellow thereof.
And if you came to our literary festival, you would have seen David interviewing Andrew Doyle about the end of woke ? Whether it's ended. It was a good interview. I saw the first part of it. I'm keen to watch the whole of it. It will be on our YouTube channel soon, so if you didn't catch it, you can watch it on YouTube. So to kick us off with the show, we're going to be talking about Ireland. I mean, we haven't actually spoke about Ireland much on this show.
Northern Ireland.
Northern Ireland. Obviously, there's been riots this week over several days. This is, of course, happening within the context of broader kind of anti-immigration sentiment that's been happening within Ireland, and there's been, riots in previous years. Rafe, talk us through these recent riots and why they occurred and how it's been dealt with.
So we've seen some truly appalling scenes in Northern Ireland over the last few days, scenes which, distressing to anyone to see and have to be condemned outright. Something close to a pogrom, actually, in many cases, in terms of the targeting of immigrant homes, burning out homes, forcing some immigrant communities, Filipinos, for example, to have to stick the flag of their country on the door next to the Union flag to say, I'm not one of those people who actually has been one of those groups implicated in the incident that caused the rioting. But of course, at the root cause again, as we saw in Dublin, in the Republic of Ireland in 2023 as well, where an immigrant stabbed some young girls, as of course we saw in Southport, we are getting to the point now where the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland are tinderboxes waiting to go off, and it takes just the smallest spark to set off now these sorts of incendiary acts. What happened in this case, where two individuals are alleged to have raped a young girl in a deprived area of Northern Ireland, Ballymena, but a poorer area of Ballymena. Interestingly, of course, when we had recently in Liverpool a car driving into a crowd of people, it was a matter of minutes, it seemed, before we were told that this was a white man who had committed this. We still haven't been told anything about the identity of these two individuals, save that they need to speak through a Romanian interpreter. Why they can't just simply say that these are two Roma children, distinct from being Romanian, of course. The Romanians and the Roma gypsies are two different communities, but this is an area which has a street on which these things have been happening. The majority of people on there are actually Roma, and yet now speaking through a Roma translator is now become the new code word for saying this person is Roma. There have been ongoing tensions between the Roma community and the wider society there, and yet even though, of course, 96% of Northern Ireland is white, and the Roma community is still fairly small. In this area, it is concentrated, and it just goes to show once again the policies of inviting into this country peoples from culturally incompatible parts of the world has dire consequences, because of course these communities, be it some areas of the Muslim community, be it the Roma community, there are certain cultures that have a problem integrating into Western society, and people don't talk enough about the Roma issue. Actually, in Northern Ireland, 0.1% of the population are Roma, but they account for 5% of those in prison, for example. There's a huge disconnect there. people have been suppressed about talking about this for so long. And so, of course, whilst we condemn these acts, it's no surprise that you are actually having people who are at the end of their tether taking things to the last resort.
Yeah, there was a Northern Ireland police chief that came out and said, kind of drawing from the Keir Starmer playbook of just saying that this was outright racist fuggery. And of course that was true in some cases, but then he went on to say that any attempt to understand this as anything other than racist fuggery should be rejected. And of course it just, there is a broader context to this, as you say, as to why people are so angry and why it is a tinderbox. Because the change that has happened in Northern Ireland has been quite significant, hasn't it? I mean, it's Ireland and Northern Ireland are kind of following on from what's been happening in England in terms of mass immigration, but it is affecting them slightly differently, isn't it?
I think while it's necessary to condemn those engaged in the violence, it is also necessary, completely, utterly, and without mercy, to condemn those who for the past 50 years have prevented discussion in the public sphere about the effects, cultural and political and economic, of mass migration, and particularly, as Rafe said, from cultures which are fundamentally incapable of integrating with our own. These people bear the most enormous responsibility because they are the people who prosecuted this agenda relentlessly, who called those who called it into question, Rafe being a prime example, racists, xenophobes, bigots, and who now, when faced with the consequences of their policies, are running scared from taking any sort of responsibility at all. It is perfectly obvious that when you take an enormously homogenous place like the province of Ulster and introduce into it even the smallest amount of heterodox immigration, you are going to come up against problems, cultural problems, political problems, economic problems. Nothing has been done to ameliorate those problems. Nothing has been done to address the valid, reasonable, practical concerns of the native community, and nothing has been done to make those people feel safe in their own houses. So while it is, of course, entirely regrettable, and while we must, of course, condemn any sort of violence, as particularly Rafe mentioned, people being burnt out of immigrant hostels, people being burnt out of hotels, we must also make an attempt to understand why they feel pushed to such extraordinary, extreme action. And it is extreme. This should not be the consequence of an attack, the nature of which occurred. What should have happened, of course, is that the police step in, the perpetrators are arrested, there is a general calming of the population, things move on as normal. This was impossible because of the number, the frequency, and the severity of these sorts of incidents, and the way that they've been swept under the carpet. We see the same here over and over again in the mainland, with the rape gangs and with the amount of crime perpetrated by immigrants. For instance, 1 in 20 Albanians in this country is now imprisoned, to take one statistic. People are not going to be gulled against this any longer. I think there is a real feeling among the population at large, perfectly normal people, not people like us who are engaged in politics as a profession or as a vocation, but perfectly normal people now feel enough is enough. And if those empowered by the state to do things will not do things to mitigate those actions, we then must.
One thing I was thinking about this was, obviously in here, in England, we do have a political party, Reform Party, who are kind of seen as the anti-immigrant party, or that's how they present themselves anyway. I know people are cynical about whether they can achieve what they want to achieve and whether they really believe in what they want to believe. I was curious about whether Northern Ireland does have a political vehicle or somebody within politics expressing kind of people's concerns around immigration.
Oh, it certainly does. I mean, of course, Northern Ireland has its own political parties, but the DUP and others are very, very strong on these issues and have been very uncomfortable with a lot of the migrant housing, and also, of course, where these current people have been burnt out of their houses, where they've been relocated to, including into a leisure centre. But, David's absolutely right when he says that, when you have riots, as we saw in Tottenham in 2011, when you had the BLM riots, there was every effort made to understand the root cause of what caused people to riot. And you had, even with the BLM, you had people like Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner taking the knee, saying we sympathise and understand. There is none of that desire to get to the root cause and understand what caused people in Southport or in Northern Ireland or indeed in Dublin in 2023. Again, why is that? Because I think, they realize what a fractious state we're in right now, and the only way you can keep this multicultural bandwagon on the road is to suppress the truth tellers, to demonize those who dare to speak out against it and to protest. And only by suppressing the truth about what's actually happening in this country can you prevent, some cataclysmic events from happening. And essentially, it's no surprise that somewhere like Northern Ireland is proving a hotspot with this because of what indeed all of Ireland. It's quite interesting, actually. Ireland's only a nation of 5 million people, but we've seen their scenes. They've only had immigration for a few years, and they're already rioting. We've had it here for a quarter of a century, and we still haven't. And that's because in the Republic, they took a long time to get independence, and they fought for that in a very hard struggle. Their identity is very important to them, and they don't want to give that up. Much the same way that the Poles and Hungarians don't want to lose their identity, having lost it to communism. They see the threat posed by new cultures coming in, supplanting that. We here, as I said before, we are like the frog in the steadily boiling cup of water who's oblivious to the dangers and risks it pose to our own identity. And in Northern Ireland, my gosh, the land of sectarianism, that's a group rife, and they know full well how important their identity is, and they're well equipped to fight. I mean, it's second nature to many of them to come out fighting. And the great tragedy for the mainland, of course, is that we are now importing sectarianism into the mainland in the shape of the future, be it the civil war of Professor David Betts, but essentially having the white identitarian movement, which is still in its infancy, going head to head against the reality of Islam.
Now, we've been told our whole lives that wrinkle creams were the easiest way to look younger. Now, one doctor says that that's nothing but old news. According to Dr. John Lake, the world-renowned Beverly Hills beauty expert, most wrinkle fixes on the market are nothing but glorified moisturizers. They hardly make a dent on your appearance, and some can even be harmful to your skin, he says. Recently, Dr. Lake has focused his attention away from mainstream cosmetic practices. Why? Well, so he can pursue a revolutionary anti-aging breakthrough, one that some experts say could empty the wallets of the cosmetic industry. It's almost like Photoshop for your face. You may even be mad after seeing how easy it is to visibly erase your wrinkles from view, Lake told reporters. His personal clients have dubbed his new do-it-yourself technique the, quote, age rewinder method, because it can take years or even decades off your appearance in under 2 minutes. In light of this amazing breakthrough, Dr. Lake has released a step-by-step video to the public, free and uninterrupted, where he outlines exactly how to use this simple solution from home. If this helps even one person look younger or feel more confident, I'll be thrilled knowing I helped, Dr. Lake commented. The video has since gone viral. At first it was shared by users on Facebook, but since then it's racked up over 2.3 million views and counting. So far, the comments and feedback have been outstanding, with thousands of women reporting they look decades younger. One viewer even commented, "Best results of anything I've used. I can't believe how well this works. I'll never stop using this. I don't understand how it works, but the results are great. Thank you." So you can find out more about this yourself right now. Go to bhmd1.com/culture or click on the link in the description box below. That's bhmd1.com/culture. Now, there is one thing Dr. Lake asks from his viewers. If watching this video helps you look and feel younger than you have in years, then please do share it with your friends and your loved ones. Together we have the power to help as many women as possible reclaim a youthful look. Go watch the video at bhmd1.com/culture right now, or just click on the link in the description box below.
Can I add a corollary to what Ray said about the way that truth tellers and others are being victimized? I think there is an equal and equally powerful campaign to make, as it were, the normal person think that there is no problem. think that this is somehow isolated, somehow denuded of cause, somehow without any possible basis in fact or reason. And I truly believe that, this sounds, I suppose, on the basis of my outline, possibly conspiratorial, but I truly believe that there is a campaign from most arms of the state, be that the civil service, local government, the police forces, and the quangocracy, which is, of course, the vast unelected government of this country, to try to make people believe that there is no problem. To try to gull people, I use that verb again because I think it is the most operative one, to gull people into believing that these are isolated incidents with no basis in anything to do with mass migration, and that any reaction to them is de facto racist and xenophobic, and as a consequence, unreasonable.
Sorry, go on. Right. I mean, to your point about kind of how people are sort of pushing this kind of messaging, there was this recent story about Prevent putting out this statement about kind of expressions of concern about Western civilization and immigration were itself kind of indications of terrorism. Where this is, I mean, most people, 70% of the population now have concerns about mass immigration. And the idea that Prevent would be so brazenly kind of rejecting, most people's concerns, I mean, I was quite shocked by that. It was, I dealt with Prevent in the past in kind of my work, and it's getting more and more, to me, like there's this divergence of kind of two realities that are kind of in relation to mass immigration. And it's, I don't know, to me it feels like it's tipping, that more and more people are waking up to this issue, like even people traditionally on the left are speaking out. I don't know, do either of you think that there's a kind of a tipping point happening, or is that not the right way of
Well, I'd say that the two realities have always been present.
Oh, yeah.
Ever since the beginning of the Blair-instituted mass migration programme, and particularly since 2016, there has been the reality that people see in their communities, in their towns, in their villages, of things being changed without the slightest degree of consultation or care for those who have been here and have been here for centuries. And then there is the official narrative that we become a better, a richer, a kinder society by essentially welcoming people who despise everything we are. What I think has happened is that the former group of people have finally decided that the limits of tolerance have been reached. We are, historically, this is something the left gets right, we are historically a very tolerant nation, or a tolerant people. We believe in the indulgence of eccentricity. We believe in live and let live. But when that threatens the very existence of the culture that those virtues sprang from, then people feel they must do something. And if the official arms of the state will not do something, this is what I truly fear, people will begin to do so.
Yeah.
Over the course of the past decades, there have been two groups who've been fully tuned in to the reality of what's happening in terms of the negative effects of mass immigration. That's the working classes, those people who are at the coalface and have to deal every day coming up face to face with the reality of diversity. And the other group are those people who are politically attuned and who are aware and who watch programs like this or watch GB News and get their content from something other than the mainstream media. The great problem is that the vast majority of the nation for the last 10, 15 years still, as I like to say, there are only 20 million Twitter accounts in the country. Of those 20 million, very few are politically engaged. Most people don't know about the reality of what happened at Southport, for example. They only got told what the curated news agenda tells them. So they get their news from the BBC, they get their news from the mainstream media, so they don't see the Muslim gangs in the street. They just see the occasional example of a white thug, as they're called. They don't see the reality of what's happening, for example, in Ireland, in Dublin, for example. Everything is done to try to demonize the people who actually see that. But there are only so many conflagrations you can have before people start to wonder, well, there must be something in it. And I think we're now at this very, very critical point now where I think a wider section of society can smell that something's off, added to which they have the reality of their own eyes, where they can see the degradation of our towns and our cities. They can see that places where they had used to go to are unrecognizable, but also just the decay of the buildings and the communities which go up and down the spine of this nation.
It's a sort of inverse of crying wolf in a way. The state has consistently said for the past 25 years, there is no problem, there is no fire.
Crying sheep.
There's no conflagration. And people are saying, but hang on, we can smell the tinder beginning to ignite. We can see it on the breeze. We can see the smoke drifting across. Why will you not address this? But I think there has been an absolutely extraordinary concerted campaign across mainstream politics for the past quarter of a century to demonise anybody who brings this up as an issue, not only of national fabric, as you said, the decaying buildings, the dying high streets, the villages essentially taken over and invaded. Look at Bradford. I grew up in West Yorkshire. Bradford is now an alien town, and to all intents and purposes has been for the past quarter of a century or more. There has been a concerted campaign to say that this is not a problem, and anybody bringing it up is causing a problem.
And of course, it's an act of self-harm, it's an act of self-immolation and suicide by those political parties, because it's because of their intransigence and their refusal to actually acknowledge and accept the things that we can all see that have led to the rise of things like reform. The Tory party is dead precisely because it doesn't deal with the issues that David's been explaining. The Labour Party is having an existential crisis for precisely the same reason.
Well, the Labour Party is only alive because it has indulged these things.
Well, the Labour Party is only alive because it encouraged mass immigration. Exactly. The whole purpose of mass immigration under Labour was to incorporate a new demographic into this country, because 80% of ethnic minorities vote for the Labour Party. And so their thinking was, in the decades to come, we'll have an inbuilt advantage. And if you look at places like Bradford, and if you look at places like London, these are one-party states.
Well, as you say, certainly the effects of mass immigration are being felt very much here, where we are in London, in terms of crime rates and demographic change. Our Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has just become Sir Sadiq Khan. He's just been knighted. It's very interesting with Sadiq Khan, because anyone I talk to always says how much they hate him, and people this kind of curiosity about why he is so popular in London. He keeps managing to win elections, although people do point out that the turnout is quite low, that only 1 in 5 Londoners actually vote for him, and actually it's often that there's more people that hate him than like him. What do people make of him becoming a knight? I mean, his knighthood was for political services and public services. I mean, Rafe, what are Sadiq Khan's achievements, if any?
Well, you may ask that. Now, look, they're speaking to the editor of Burke's Period World Orders of Knighthood and Merit, so I'm a great defender of the honours system in this country, but there is no justification in my mind. Yes, he's joined the ranks of Dick Whittington, turn again, thrice Lord Mayor of London, although he's not Lord Mayor. It's an impressive record to have achieved on paper, but then, of course, the reality is only 18% of Londoners actually voted for him in the last election, and we know from polling that the majority of Londoners, if not despise him, at least think he's doing a very bad job. And this does seem like you are rewarding somebody for failure and for incompetence. And you just have to look at the rise in knife crime, the rise in violent crime, the burdens placed upon the poorest in our society. This is a Labour man, and yet, of course, it's poor people living in the outskirts of London who have to come in or travel even within their own areas now, because he's increased the size of the ULEZ zone by 18 times. They're dealing with this, the antisocial behaviour, the public transport system, the strikes, but also the graffiti everywhere, which isn't being clean. And now you have vigilante groups, or I don't even call them vigilante groups, but small groups of individuals cleaning up the Bakerloo line, for example. It's a complete calamity of the City of London in the years that he's been mayor. But also, can I just say one thing? I think maybe, Ollie, we can play a video of him speaking outside Buckingham Palace.
He was very chuffed that he'd managed to personally give me this honour, and he actually apologised for it taking so long.
The arrogance of this individual when he spoke to the media. Normally, if you're a film star or a politician or a sportsman and you get a knighthood, you speak very humbly and say what a great honour it is. You would have thought that all the honour was King Charles's to have been in the presence of Sadiq Khan. He said the king was chuffed that I was finally getting my honour, and he apologised. The king apologised to me that I had to wait so long for this honour. Oh, wow. And I thought, my God, the lack of self-awareness here is absolutely breathtaking.
That doesn't surprise me, Rafe. I have my own kind of brief personal experience with Sadiq Khan. As people may know, I was a mayoral candidate in the London elections last year. And when we was at City Hall and the election results were being announced, all the candidates kind of summoned to a room where the where the election results are read out to us, and then we go on stage and it's read out publicly. And all the candidates went into this room, apart from Sadiq Khan, and they said, "Oh, he never comes into the room. He never does that." And everybody sort of thought, like, "Oh, that's a shame," because it's, it feels like there's a person missing. And then as we were lining up to go on stage, he came in right at the last second. He went up to the Green Party candidate, who's obviously very progressive in her views, said hello to her, shook her hand, spoke to her, ignored everyone else. I kind of turned to him to sort of just nod and say, "Oh, well done, hello." And he just blanked everyone else, was very rude, didn't smile, didn't, no acknowledgement, no hello. And then he was just off. And everybody remarked, obviously there was broad range of political views in terms of the candidates, but they all sort of remarked to each other, could he have not just, smiled and sort of said, "Oh, well done, everyone, nice to see you all." And everybody left feeling a bit like, that wasn't very nice. He is a very kind of arrogant, nasty man, and it feels very personal, actually, like when you're, he doesn't seem to be able to put politics to the side. And I know that Susan Hall, the Tory candidate, felt very, that he'd really been quite nasty to her. What do you think of Sadiq Khan, David? Sir Sadiq Khan, I should say.
I think it speaks well of the character of His Majesty that he's possibly the only man in the United Kingdom who could be trusted with a sword that near Sadiq Khan without being tempted to use it.
Yeah.
He is, as you point out, a graceless, self-serving, venal, unpleasant man.
Oh, God.
And I've lived in London now for 13 years. During the course of Sir Sadiq's mayoralty, I shall only use the title because His Majesty, being the fount of all honours, has seen fit to bestow it, therefore we should see fit to use it. During the course of those 13 years, it has become a markedly more unpleasant, more dangerous, dirtier, and less enjoyable place to live. Rafe outlined many ways in which it's been so. One way that he didn't mention was the amount of social housing in this city. You mentioned the impact on the poorest of society of Sir Sadiq's mayoralty. Nearly 50% of the social housing of this city is now taken up by people who are foreign-born, of whom a third are economically inactive. Under this mayoralty, we've essentially given to people who have no right to be here, no rights of birth, no rights of work, housing that Londoners need desperately. When the majority of young Londoners are spending more than 50% of their net income on rent, because the housing market here is so broken, not least by the impact of the enormous effect of mass migration, but also because Sadiq Khan only in the past year seems to have realised that we've got this thing called the Green Belt, and that the Town and Country Planning Act of 1947 is a completely defunct piece of legislation. Young people are the very victims of this, and poor young people the very greatest victims of this. And I'm immensely surprised, therefore, when I look at the polls, that young people seem to be his greatest supporters. Yeah. Are they not cognizant of the damage that is being done to their lives and prospects by the continued incumbency of this desperately awful man? Or are they so blinded by ideology? Are they so blinded by their adherence to a defunct form of socialism, greenism, whatever you wish to call it, that they will continue to support him against their own best interests? I think this is somewhere the New Culture Forum could do a little bit of research, because it is necessary to know why in this city of, if we believe the figures, 10 million people, I'm sure we all think it's significantly greater than that, so many young people are continuing to keep this appalling regime in power.
But you answered the question. It is because we have the most radically left-wing youth in history. We've never seen such on a whole slew of policy issues. And yes, you would think instinctively, in their own best interest, they should see the harm caused by mass immigration to their prospects in terms of housing and so forth. And yet there is none of that, of course, because they have been blinkered by ideology. And it's one of the great issues of our time. Now, we do see some youth breaking away from that. These tend to be those who haven't gone to universities. We had more young people voting for the Reform Party than voted for the Conservative Party.
But not in London, of course.
But it's still insignificant. But of course, the greater issue there is that although London is only 37% white British, the number of youth of this country who are white British is even smaller, because the demographics amongst the youth are far more overrepresented. So I wouldn't be surprised if only 10% of the youth in this country, in this city, were actually white British. But added to that, the irony of ironies on top of all of that, of course, is that London is now the most socially conservative place in the whole country. So if you were the youth of the left wanting to advance gay rights and women's rights, and want Jews to walk freely on the streets and so forth. Well, actually, I'm not sure the youth of today do want Jews to walk freely on the street. But certainly, if you believe in the liberal values that the left constantly espouse, you should be opposed to the fact that this city has, because of mass immigration, become so fundamentally conservative. But I think the issue of this knighthood actually also reveals the true depth of the odiousness and disingenuous nature of Sadiq Khan's character, because this is a man with a visceral hatred of Britain and its past and of the empire. This is a man who's called for a slavery museum in London. And he's always telling us he's the son of a Pakistani bus driver. He went to Pakistan on an official visit. Not once did he mention that Pakistan is a center of modern slavery. But every opportunity he has to denigrate Britain's past and its history, he takes, and to call the British Empire one of the greatest evils ever known. And yet there he is, willing to go down on bended knee and rise as a Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire itself. I mean, that just shows the level of hypocrisy in the man. It's all about venalism.
If I may, I think that it does show a wider problem with the honour system, which is that people are being honoured far too early in their lives and careers. This is historically supposed to be something that is given for a period of service that has come to an end, and usually a period of great service. To give it to someone in the midst of a mayoralty can only be seen as a nakedly political act, brings the entire system into dishonour, and I must say it draws a question on whether this thing I believe that we all support in principle is actually functioning in practice. You could think also of Sir Simon Case, the erstwhile cabinet secretary who did not cover himself in glory at the time. You can think of whatever you believe of their behaviour during the pandemic, Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance, both of whom were honoured much before their time. This seems to be a consistent failure of the way that our state functions at the moment, that when someone who is politically, as it were, papabile, is in function, is in practice, they are given the honour, as it were almost to say that you have the official imprimatur, rather than being a disinterested, unbiased system of honouring those who, by hook or crook, whether it's as a dinner lady, as a lollipop lady, as a local council official, as Mayor of London, whether you be so high and mighty or whether you be so low, have reached the end of their period of public service and then are rewarded for it.
And that's an important point, because, there were great reviews made of the honour system in 2000, 2006, and then a decade later, and they actually did bring the honour system into much higher regard amongst the public. The public can make nominations for honours, for example, and so forth. One of the things they did was they ended automaticity. So if you had been an ambassador, you automatically got a knighthood. And we've had ambassadors to Germany, to India, to major countries in Europe who haven't received knighthoods. You used to become a baronet if you were Lord Mayor of London. Now you can't even guarantee you'll get a knighthood. So in many ways it has become a lot better, except of course if you are a celebrity, if you are papabile, because you'll have, for example, you'll win a gold medal and then you'll get an OBE afterwards. It's two for the price of one. That shouldn't be. In the old days, you'd get a knighthood or an OBE after a lifetime of commitment to sports, and then also being shown to be supporting charities or working within the sporting community. Now, if you're a celebrity, then you automatically get a knighthood, it seems, or you get an OBE. And the same thing applies to people like this in politics, who shouldn't be getting it until they're much more senior.
I must say, in the case of David Beckham, I rather feel he deserves it for sheer damned effort. He's worked so hard at getting this knighthood. Let's all just say, well done, Sir David. You really wanted this. You've gone for it. But why? For instance, the World Cup winning team of 1966 got their OBEs, as the Beatles had. None of them were knighted for another 20 or 30 years. I do believe it brings the system into dishonour. And it makes people think, well, why do we still have this thing? Is it anachronistic? Is it silly? Is it, as you say, you've won your gold medal. Why do you need an additional bauble?
I was curious, Rafe, do you think it's the case that left-leaning politicians are more likely to be knighted than politicians on the right? I don't know. I mean, in terms of, political service, arguably someone like Nigel Farage has done an extraordinary amount in politics, but I can't imagine him being knighted anytime soon. And I mean, I wouldn't want him to, but I think, as you said, it should be at the end of the career. And obviously he is very much involved in politics, and it would be seen as very political if he was to be knighted. But is it kind of safer for a left-leaning politician to be knighted, or not really?
Well, I don't think there's much of a distinction between the two. But it's certainly not safer for them and for their image. And this is what's
it's a good point.
When you have someone like Keir Starmer, of course, also getting a knighthood, that sticks in the craw of a lot of his supporters. Lady Nugee, otherwise known as Emily Thornbury, who...
Sorry, Dame Emily, let us not...
That was my point. Lady Nugee, as she then was, now a Dame Emily as well, for what she got that, it's quite remarkable. But it just goes to show when a push comes to shove, people's principles are, as Groucho Marx said, these are my principles, and if you don't like them, I've got others. And that applies very much to the honour system, I think.
Okay. I'm sticking with Westminster and London politics. Dominic Cummings has kind of been doing the rounds on various podcasts in the last month. He's recently given a talk at Oxford. He's very much in similar vein to Liz Truss in that he's been at kind of the top of politics and seen how it all works. And now having left, he's kind of dishing the dirt on various things and calling out corruption. What was it? What has he been speaking about recently, David? About kind of what has he been revealing about Westminster? Has he revealed anything that we kind of didn't already know? And what do you make of his kind of what he's been saying?
Has he revealed anything we didn't already know? No, not particularly.
No.
We're all completely aware of the fact that ministers are powerless, that the average member of Parliament is, in effect, less powerful than the average member of a parish or county council. And that Whitehall sees itself as the permanent government, aided and abetted by the vast quangocracy. What he perhaps has done that most people would not have known is to provide examples whereof that occurs. So, for instance, in regards to our nuclear deterrent, this is all, as you say, the speech he gave at Oxford, which has now been written up by the Spectator magazine, and so you can read the edited highlights of that, which is, in typical Dom fashion, very long and larded with quotations. So I shall leave our viewers and listeners to do that in their own sweet leisure time. But I think it is important that someone like Cummings, who has functioned at the very top of government, is making such a forceful case for our elected politicians, even whom we vest our trust and our power by delegation, or by representation, I should in fact say, are essentially useless. This is really important for democracy. Because we, through lending our vote to them in an election, which is always, as it were, a lease, not a permanent gift, say to them, right, you go off and represent our interests. And should you gain power, should you actually get to that point where you're able to exercise some kind of influence, you do so again in our interest. Now, if they consistently find themselves in that position, but denuded of that power, lacking that influence, lacking that ability to act, then what is the point of representative democracy? Why are we still going through the facade? This is essentially what Cummings is pointing out. Why are we going through the facade of elections if, in fact, there is a permanent government comprised of the civil service, the quangocracy, and all those extra governmental bodies that seem to function regardless of whether it's a socialist government or a conservative government or another in power? The only point at which I draw some shall we say, conflict with Mr. Cummings is when he's talking about the exercise of power and fails to reflect on his own exercise of power during 2020, 2021, when he exercised essentially untrammeled power, along with, and to declare an interest, a great friend of mine, Lord Gove of Tory. They were able to act with no parliamentary oversight. Decisions were presented to Parliament by Gove and by Hancock to be rubber-stamped. And for Cummings, who was the architect of these decisions, to then complain about Parliament being removed from the process is, I think, slightly hypocritical. But the overall thrust of his argument is correct. The analysis he makes is, I think, a sound one. And it's something that all of us who are concerned with functioning of democracy should take seriously. Because though we may disagree with decisions he has made in the past, I do believe quite sincerely that he's done so with the interests of the nation at heart. And for him to make such a trenchant criticism of the system shows that he really believes that it's at such a pitch of awfulness that we are so defunct as a democracy that if he did not do that, it would be a dereliction of his own duty.
Yeah, I mean, he does really speak about it in dire terms, doesn't he, Rafe? He characterises kind of Westminster politics as being purely performative, kind of that the public-facing politics that we see is basically meaningless, that they kind of have meetings and that don't really lead to anything and that it's just performative and that actually they're just kind of celebrities and the decisions that are made are really via the civil service and cabinet secretary. And when they get into power, they really realise that they can't do anything, but they sort of, because they're in that position of power, well, not a position of power, but because they've got to the status of being an MP, they sort of go along with it because they don't want to lose their seat or they will kind of conform to what they're supposed to do. I mean, does that, it kind of how he presents it, it seems a little bit conspiratorial, but actually when you look at the detail, you can imagine how that can happen at that level. What do you make of it, Rafe? I mean, do you think is he exaggerating or
not at all?
No?
I mean, people familiar with Yes Minister even see how the deep state, as they called it in America, works and operates, and the difficulty with which Donald Trump is even having with mass deportations just goes to show how difficult it is to destabilize and to fundamentally alter all of that. So whether you are the Tory party or whether you're the Labour Party, you both find the issue of how to stop the boats, for example, completely impossible. And that's because there is the power does not rest with cabinet ministers. As he says in the article, most power now rests within the cabinet office, and the cabinet secretary wields far greater power than everywhere else. And as he said, the power struggles in Whitehall aren't to sit around the cabinet table, because the cabinet meetings are useless. All the meetings that they have are performative, because the conclusions, which are going to be published after the meeting, have been drafted and approved before the meetings. And so the power is actually who gets to draft the conclusions before the meeting starts. I think the most important aspect of his speech that he gave to the Firehouse Institute is essentially to remind us of history. And this is the cyclical nature of history. And then what we are seeing now is a regime, if we can call it an ancien regime, in its dying embers. The political class, the media class, our universities, every institution almost you can think about is essentially beholden to one belief, which has become so separated from reality, the reality that the rest of us can see, that it gets to the point essentially where the chasm between the two becomes so vast that the old elites are going to crumble and tumble down. He quotes the great Marshall McLuhan from my old alma mater at the University of Toronto, who said that the new medium is invisible to those who are in the middle of it. And of course, they've been in the Westminster bubble for so long, they don't see the things which all of our viewers can see quite simply. They are chasing news stories which have no impact and no relevance to the people outside, and it's only a matter of time before this comes to some sort of decisive denouement.
I was surprised that he didn't draw the most obvious historical parallel, which is with the declining years of the Soviet Union, when you had the gerontocracy of Brezhnev, Andropov, and then Gorbachev eventually, but a state that functioned essentially by civil service. And you had this turnover at the top of the Politburo, tanks that looked marvellous but didn't move and didn't have any shells to fire, an army that had no bullets. It was a sclerotic state. And this, it seems, is incredibly close to our own situation, where we cannot now call the British Army by international terms an army. It's a brigade. It's below that which international law defined as an army. We have a navy that is at best a flotilla, given that at any one time only one of our two aircraft carriers functions, and that it's a question of whether you could get sufficient aircraft on it to actually make it work anyway. We have a nuclear deterrent that is now declining vastly. And as I said, this is something that Cummings points out, but has been said to me lately, you have no idea of the real cost of the nuclear deterrent because it's hidden in the books. We can barely function with it anyway. And your viewers may be interested to know that over the next 10 years, the amount we spend on migrant hotels and accommodation will be 4 times the cost of that of maintaining the nuclear deterrent. Value for money for the taxpayer as ever. So I think this was the most obvious historical comparison. Yes, he's correct to talk about Pitt. Yes, he's correct to talk about the bad years of the early 20th century. But there is a much closer comparison and also a much more terrifying one. Because what we saw with the end of the Soviet Union, as Rafe knows all too well, was not a great collapse. It was just a crumbling, pathetic decline. The Soviet Union came to an end after the fall of the Berlin Wall because it was simply no longer able to support the lie of its own power. And I fear this is where Britain is going. We will not collapse in a great sort of Goethe-Demerol. There will not be the fires on the heath. What there will be is, as we're seeing around us now with our civil fabric, the gentle, appalling and obvious decline of the state and everything we hold dear. Because those in power, by us, with our votes, are not able to do anything about it, and those with the power to do something about it either refuse to recognize the problem or are in fact complicit in its happening.
What is Dominic Cummings' kind of prognosis? Does he have a prognosis? Does he suggest how we can tackle this? Does he have a solution or not? Because this problem with the civil service, I know he's bringing it to light in a different way, and he's saying some very interesting things. But it has been talked about, and everybody just says, that problem has been outlined by lots of people that politicians can't make decisions. But what do we do about that? Like, what can be done?
Oh well. One perfectly simple thing that you do is to accept that Northcote Trevelyan, the governing rules of the civil service, do not function now. We need to do essentially what the Americans do and what the Australians do and the Canadians are beginning to do, which is when a new regime comes in, a new government is elected, you put your own permanent secretaries in charge. That way you actually take charge of the levers of power. The civil service is the day-to-day functioning of the state. And it is ludicrous to believe in this highly politicised age, particularly given the demographic makeup of the civil service, that they are not going to have their own political ideas. So the first thing you do is to say, and this was, by the way, suggested by several people, including Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, to Theresa May in 2017, and she shot it down. She would simply not entertain the idea, despite the evidence of its working in, say, Australia. So yet another thing that we have to thank Dame Theresa for.
But this is also what Dominic Cummings wanted to do when he came into power in 2019. He wanted to fundamentally reform the civil service along with the BBC and everything else. And we should be many years into that process right now. That's the great tragedy of, expect the unexpected. Had it not been for COVID, he could have gone quite far in some of these fundamental reforms.
You see, I slightly disagree with you on that, because COVID was the perfect time in which to undertake such radical alteration of the nature of the state. Given that everything else was up for grabs, if he'd been truly radical, and if
my point was he had Barnard Castle. He was he was untouchable. Boris Johnson was a puppet, and he was the puppet master. And if you want to see where the Tory party got derailed, it was with the departure of Dominic Cummings, and then there was nobody to control the puppet apart from Carrie Antoinette. And you can see how rudderless the Tory party was with the departure of Cummings. Cummings was the only one who was really plugged into the Red Wall, who truly understood the issues that were at play and understood that tectonic shifting of plates in politics.
Yes.
That vote that had been lent to Boris Johnson was only lent for one parliament. It needed to be cemented and confirmed, and of course it's now gone over to Farage and Reform. So it's a big, we shouldn't do what is in history, but had it not been for COVID, and had Cummings been able to actually embark upon those reforms, including levelling up, because money wouldn't have been spent on the furlough scheme, I think it's one of the great regrets, I think, of my life, is that we didn't see his plan for action come into effect.
Yes, but we did see his plan for action come into effect in other ways which were totally detrimental to the state. So let us not be altogether too trusting of Mr. Cummings and his plans. I believe that his analysis is broadly correct, and I believe that his solutions could possibly work. But the thing to be borne in mind, I think he's a brilliant mind. Dominic is a truly brilliant mind. His Oxford tutor said that he was the brightest person he ever taught. But brilliance often leads people down blind alleys. Brilliance, when it is not allied to common sense, is akin to a form of madness. You end up with this Heideggerian sense of enormous self-worth, which is completely divorced from reality. So, yes, let's look at the analysis, let's consider the solutions, but let us also take an enormous pinch of salt with it and think that there are probably other people thinking along similar lines, and I think it's not unfair to mention here Robert Jenrick and Danny Kruger, and Jacob Rees-Mogg, who have similar analyses of the problems with society, but perhaps a more practical set of solutions of how to deal with them at a political level.
Yeah, I mean, he's been saying in his interviews that he's been talking to Nigel Farage and Reform Party and giving them advice and saying that they need to build up a team. But he's kind of rejecting any allegiance to a political party, sort of saying, he doesn't see himself going into politics. But, with all of these people, you sort of feel like, watch this space. I imagine he might do.
Dominic Cummings.
No, you don't know.
Given his propensity for chucking matches at boats and setting them on fire, I think he's burnt entire navies. It's unlikely that he will be making these alliances.
He's kind of enjoying being a one-man band, perhaps.
Of course, because his power is out responsibility.
Yes.
Well, he has spoken about creating a new type of political movement from outside, but certainly he's not a Westminster bubble type.
There was this talk of him start a kind of start-up party, it was called, I believe. But
he could probably get together with Rupert Lowe. They're all seeking for something else at the moment.
Yeah, there's always talk of a new political party. It never often amounts to anything. Anyway, that's all for Newspeak this week. If you're a member, you can join us for our extra content for members, where we're going to be talking about the decriminalisation, I should say, of abortion, actually. It's a very serious thing that has only just kind of come to my attention. So do join us for that. And if not, we'll see you next week.
Our mission at the New Culture Forum is and always has been to defend and celebrate Britain's history, culture and its people, and indeed Western civilization, at a time when both are under sustained attack. We have grown from small beginnings to become the country's most influential right-leaning cultural think tank. Our content is watched and read by some of Britain's most influential political figures. But now, we need your help. If you believe in what we do, then please do become a member. For as little as £4 a month, you can make a vital contribution to what we do. As a member of the NCF family, you will help ensure that we can continue to produce quality content online, such as our 3 weekly programmes, Whittle, which is our flagship interview show, Newspeak, our panel discussion show, and Deprogrammed, which is targeted at Britain's youth. As you probably know, in addition, we produce important documentaries, such as our critically acclaimed 6-part series, The West, a stunning celebration of the history and genius of Western civilization. And our ongoing documentary series, Heresies, with hard-hitting episodes tackling subjects such as immigration, gender ideology, and BBC bias. But the New Culture Forum is much more than a YouTube channel. We don't just complain about Britain as it is, we provide real solutions and clear policies on how we can push back against the madness and restore sanity to this nation. Our presenters are now highly sought after and have become familiar faces across the media. Our prestigious annual Smith Lecture and our regional and indeed national conferences have attracted world-class speakers. Perhaps most importantly, we are the only organisation on the right of politics that has launched a national movement without actually being a political party. And uniquely, through our NCF Locals programme, we've established some 30 active branches in towns and cities right across the nation, from Edinburgh to Exeter, and with many more on the way. We're very proud of what we've achieved, and our members have made it possible. In return, our members receive access to exclusive content, invitations to private events, free or discounted tickets to our conferences and lectures, free copies of our books, and much more. I very much hope that you'll join us too by clicking the link in the description or going to our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Now is the time that we need your help. Thank you.